you had that third failure in a row, did you think, I need to pack this in?
Never.
Why not?
I don't ever give up.
SpaceX, Elon Musk's company that commercialized reusable rocketry and plummeted the cost to space by 85%, has reportedly confidentially filed to go public at $2 trillion. Not only would that make it the largest IPO or initial public offering in human history, but it will also set the stage for one of the most epic years in the history of the stock market and business. This IPO would be bigger than Saudi Aramco back in 2019, which raised $29 billion. SpaceX is looking to raise somewhere between 50 and 75 billion in a single offering. I've been tracking Elon Musk and his companies for 14 years now, and this is easily one of, if not the biggest moment in Elon's entire history as an entrepreneur. Now, everyone's going to talk about the number of $2 trillion for a rocket company. The financial media is going to debate whether that valuation makes sense. The bears and the haters and the skepticals will say it's insane. The bulls and the fans will say it's too cheap, but both sides will miss something that's going to be much bigger. This filing will reshape the American economy. It will permanently change the global space industry. It will create thousands of new millionaires overnight, and it will set the stage for what might be the most valuable company in the history of civilization. And I want to walk through all of it. Once you understand what's really going on underneath the surface of the IPO, the $2 trillion number starts to look more like a floor and not a ceiling. Nothing in this video is financial or investment advice. So, to understand why a rocket company is worth $2 trillion, we need to understand three things. We need to understand what SpaceX actually is today. We need to understand what Starship, SpaceX's next generation rocket, changes about the economics of space, and we need to understand a convergence that almost nobody is talking about. Let me start with what SpaceX actually is today. I think most people, even the people that follow this stuff kind of closely, don't fully appreciate how dominant this company has become. So let me go ahead and give you some context. In 2008, SpaceX almost went bankrupt. The company had failed 3 consecutive Falcon 1 launches, their first generation rocket. Elon Musk had already poured almost his entire fortune from PayPal into this company. There are famous photos of Elon and his team staring at the debris that was left from one of the rocket launch explosions. He was sleeping on friends' couches to try and divert as much money as possible towards his, successful rocket launches. And if that 4th launch would have failed, SpaceX was done. Finished. There would be no Starlink or Falcon 9 or Starship or an IPO. Luckily, the 4th launch actually succeeded, and that was 18 years ago. The SpaceX team bet every single dollar on the idea that a private company could build rockets better and cheaper than governments. And everyone, and I literally mean everyone, thought he was insane, because he was. Now, that company is filing to go public at a valuation larger than 93% of the GDP of the countries on Earth. In 2025, SpaceX launched 165 orbital missions on Falcon 9 alone. That's roughly 1 launch every 2 days all year long. They now control approximately 82% of the global commercial launch market. To put that in perspective, imagine one airline controlling 82% of all flights on Earth. That's SpaceX, but for space. Now, of course, launches are super cool. We get incredible footage, these rockets going up into space, but that's actually not where most of the money comes from. Most people think of SpaceX as a rocket company, and that was true 5 years ago, but the part that surprises most people today is that SpaceX is really a telecommunications company that happens to also build rockets. And why is that? Because of Starlink. Starlink, the satellite internet constellation, is the cash cow for the company. SpaceX has over 10,000 satellites in orbit, providing internet to more than 9 million subscribers worldwide. They're in rural areas, remote locations, ships, planes, military operations, sometimes in the city. Starlink is literally everywhere. Starlink alone generated somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $12 billion in revenue in 2025. The total company revenue was about 15 to 16 billion, with roughly 8 billion in profit. Elon himself said that NASA, which by the way stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration, I just learned that today, the single biggest space agency on the planet, will only account for about 5% of SpaceX revenue in 2026. The vast majority is going to be commercial Starlink. So when you hear $2 trillion rocket company, that's not what you're actually buying. You're buying a company that has a near monopoly on orbital launch and a rapidly scaling global internet infrastructure with 9 million paying subscribers growing at an insane clip. with over $15 billion in government contract backlog through 2030. Oh, and by the way, they just acquired XAI, Elon's artificial intelligence company, in an all-stock deal back in February. And there's massive rumors starting to swirl that SpaceX and Tesla will merge once SpaceX goes public. Now, I want you to keep this detail in mind. In March 2026, Tesla, SpaceX, and XAI jointly announced something called Terafab, a $25 billion advanced chip fabrication complex in Austin, Texas, which is targeting 100,000 wafer starts per month, scaling to 1 million. They're looking to build custom AI chips and memory chips for self-driving cars, humanoid robots, and AI computing satellites in space. 80% of the compute output is targeted at space and orbital applications. I want you to remember that. I'm going to come back to it at a later time in this video. Now, real quick, 80% of you that regularly watch this channel aren't subscribed. And if you're enjoying this video, I would greatly appreciate it that you click subscribe. It's totally free and it goes a long way to support this channel. Thank you so much. Okay, now that we all have some context and background on SpaceX, we need to talk about Starship, because this is really the main reason why SpaceX's valuation is so high. And it's not so much about what it can do today, but what it will enable humanity to achieve in just a few years. And trust me when I tell you, this product is easily one of the most, if not the most important product in human history. Just as important as fire, electricity, the wheel, and the internet. You'll very quickly see what I mean. Starship is SpaceX's next generation rocket. It's the biggest, most powerful rocket ever built. It can carry 100 to 150 metric tons to low Earth orbit. That's LEO. Basically, that's the altitude where the space station hangs out today. 150 metric tons is equivalent to the weight of 100 cars. In expandable mode, where you don't bring back the rocket, it can carry up to 250 tons, which is roughly the weight of an empty 747 jumbo jet per rocket. And so for comparison, Falcon 9 carries about 23 tons. Starship carries roughly 5 to 7 times more payload per launch. But payload capacity isn't the crazy part. The crazy part is the cost. Right now, Falcon 9 costs customers roughly $2,700 to $3,000 per kilogram to get something into orbit. That's already the cheapest in the world by a wide margin. ULA's Vulcan rocket costs around $4,000 per kilogram. Europe's Ariane 6 costs $4,000 to $6,000 per kilogram. Those are the modern rockets. Go back 10 or 20 years and you're talking $10, $20, even $50,000 per kilogram. Starship's target, and I want to be very careful here when I say target, because it's aspirational, is somewhere between $10 and $100 per kilogram. I'm gonna repeat that number, okay? $10 to $100 per kilogram to orbit. That's 30 to 300 times reduction from the current Falcon 9 prices. And it's over 1,000 time reduction from where the industry was 10 years ago. And so how's that possible? By using full reusability. That means both the booster, the big bottom part, and the upper stage, the spaceship that actually goes to orbit, come back and land. You refuel them and fly again. Think of it like an airplane. You don't throw away a 737 after every flight from New York to Chicago. That would be insane. But that's exactly what every rocket in history has done. You build it for hundreds of millions of dollars, you fly it once, and it burns up or crashes into the ocean. That's how NASA did it. That's how Russia does it. That's how Europe does it. SpaceX already partially solved this with Falcon 9. The booster comes back and lands on a drone ship in the ocean or back at the launch pad, which is still one of the most spectacular things that all of us have probably seen online. Starship is designed to take it to a new level. Both stages come back. Both stages get reused. They've already caught the booster with the launch tower, which was absolutely wild to watch, and I'm sure you agree. And they're testing upper stage recovery right now. Full routine reusability isn't proven yet, obviously, but the engineering is progressing really quickly. Now, for the propellant, methane and liquid oxygen costs roughly $500,000 to $2 million per launch. The vehicle itself costs maybe $90 million to build initially, but if you fly 20, 50, 100 times, you're spreading that $90 million across all those flights. At 100 flights per vehicle, the vehicle cost per flight is $900,000. If you add propellant and operations, you're looking at maybe $2 to $5 million per launch. For 100 to 150 tons of payload, which would equal roughly $33 per kilo, the math gets ridiculous very quickly. And that's what gets you to that $10 per kilogram number. Now think about what happens when you reduce the cost of getting to space by 100 times. You don't just do the same things cheaper, you do entirely new things that were never possible before. before. This is the Wright's Law argument, the idea that every time you double cumulative production, costs drop by a predictable percentage. It's why solar panels went from $76 per watt in 1977 to about 20 cents today. Rockets have the same exact physics, but SpaceX has relentless cost curves. But on top of this, you also have Jevons paradox, which says that when things get really cheap, you don't do the same things for cheaper, you do a lot more things because you can actually afford to do those things. For example, with air travel, back in the 1900s when it started to take off, regulations were able to drop the price of air travel by a lot. What that meant is a lot more people were now able to afford to go on a plane. And so air travel exploded. That's the same exact thing happening with space, specifically rockets. Now think about when the iPhone launched in 2007. It created an entirely new economy. You had Uber, Instagram, Airbnb, mobile banking, TikTok, YouTube, my ability to be a full-time content creator. None of those things existed before cheap, powerful smartphones became ubiquitous. The iPhone was a platform. It lowered the barrier to entry for an entire world of applications that nobody could have predicted. Starship is the iPhone of space. At $10 to $100 per kilogram, you can put AI satellite constellations in orbit. You can have hundreds of thousands, even millions of specialized satellites, AI inference satellites, orbital data centers that take advantage of unlimited solar power, and the vacuum of space for cooling. You can also do space manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, advanced materials, and fiber optics in microgravity, where the physics produce better results than anything possible on Earth. Also, point-to-point Earth transport becomes viable. New York to Shanghai in like 30 minutes. You don't use a plane, you use a Starship. It goes into space and it comes back down on the other side of the planet in 30 minutes. That's faster than most people's commute to work. Now, the G's that it would pull on your body, it's probably very uncomfortable. You'd feel like freaking Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar, okay? But you'll get there in 30 minutes. But you could also ship emergency medical supplies from the United States to a natural disaster zone in Southeast Asia, as an example. Or you could move military equipment anywhere on Earth in 45 minutes. The Department of Defense is already exploring contracts for this kind of capability. Because when you can move 100 tons of cargo to any point on the planet in less time than it takes to watch a freaking Netflix episode, the logistics of everything changes. Even space-based solar power, collecting solar energy in space, where there's no atmosphere, you don't have clouds or nighttime, and beaming it down to Earth or sending back recharged batteries, it becomes economically thinkable at these costs. You can at least think about it. The sun delivers about 5 times more energy per square meter in orbit than on the ground, and it's worth taking advantage of. Now think about how that connects with AI. What's the biggest constraint on training and running AI systems right now? It's energy. Every major AI company, you have Microsoft, Google, Amazon, XAI, Meta, they're all scrambling to find enough power for their data centers. Microsoft is restarting 3 Mile Island nuclear plant that had that famous partial meltdown in 1979. They're restarting it because there simply isn't enough electricity on the grid to power these AI systems. What if you could just build a data center in space where you have unlimited solar energy and then you can radiate away heat into the vacuum? That sounds crazy, but the math starts working at Starship's cost per kilogram. Now, some analysts are discussing scenarios that would require 5,000 to 10,000 Starship launches to build out large-scale orbital AI infrastructure. And that's a lot of launches, but at $2 to $5 million per launch, that's $10 to $50 billion for potentially unlimited AI computing power. Companies spend more than that on Earth-based data centers every single year. So when you hear $2 trillion rocket company and your instinct is to laugh, I get it. But you're not really valuing a rocket company at that point. You're valuing a platform that could unlock a multi-trillion-dollar space economy that doesn't exist yet. The same way that Apple in 2007 wasn't selling phones, it was selling the platform for the entire mobile economy. Now, the human stakes of this IPO are obviously enormous. This affects real people in ways I think most financial coverage completely ignores, honestly. And I can say this as a former Tesla employee. For SpaceX's roughly 14,000 employees, many of whom hold stock options or restricted stock units, basically stock, this is a generational wealth event. Early engineers who joined SpaceX when it was valued at a few $billion and received options at those prices, if this company goes public at $2 trillion, those options are worth a lot. We're literally talking engineers becoming worth tens of millions of dollars overnight, and they deserve it. Similar to what happened with early Google employees or early Facebook employees, except the valuation gap between grant price and IPO price is potentially much wider because SpaceX stayed private for so long. And now I feel really bad for those guys once they get the tax bill for those shares and options, because that's gonna freaking hurt so bad, but at least they have more money, okay? Now, for the rest of the space industry, this IPO is an existential moment. Boeing and ULA have been struggling for years. Boeing's Starliner crew capsule, which was supposed to be NASA's alternative to SpaceX's Dragon, has been plagued with helium leaks, software issues, and delays that have cost Boeing over $1 billion in overruns. And ULA's Vulcan rocket is more expensive and less capable than Falcon 9, let alone Starship. Arianespace in Europe has been losing market share steadily to cheaper options. When SpaceX goes public and raises $50 to $75 billion, money it can pour directly into Starship development and Starlink expansion, the competitive gap is going to get much wider. Boeing, which once built the Saturn V rocket that took humans to the moon, now finds itself in a position where its space division is essentially a rounding error compared to SpaceX. And that's really wild to think about, honestly. Now, there is a silver lining for competitors. When SpaceX's IPO news broke, Rocket Lab stock jumped 5.5%. Planet Labs jumped 11%. Intuitive Machines jumped over 10%. Why did they do that? Because the SpaceX IPO validates the entire space economy. It tells institutional investors, the pension funds, and all the endowments, all the sovereign wealth funds, basically anybody who has money, that space is a real investable sector that's going to cause more money to flow into the industry overall. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. At least in the short term, but the long-term competitive dynamics are clear. SpaceX's cost advantages are only accelerating. Now, the skeptical people will tell you this valuation is insane. $2 trillion for a company making $15 billion in revenue, that's absolutely ridiculous. That's a price to sales ratio of 80. That's higher than pretty much any company at this scale in history by far. But from where I'm sitting, not financial investment advice, again, having tracked this for 14 years and having significant skin in the game being a Tesla shareholder since 2012, I think the 80 times price to sales argument misses the point entirely. You're not paying 80 times current revenue. You're paying for the platform optionality. The revenue projections for 2026 alone are 22 to 24 billion, and Starlink's subscriber growth shows no signs of slowing. ARK Invest model projects a $2.5 trillion enterprise value by 2030 with a bull case of 3.1 trillion. That means at 2 trillion today, you're buying at a discount to where an independent model says it'll be in 4 years. And that model doesn't necessarily account for the entire platform economics. Now, for retail investors, everyday people with 401ks, and Robinhood accounts or E-Trade, this is the first time they'll have the opportunity to buy into SpaceX. For years, SpaceX has been the single most sought after private company in the world. The only way to get exposure was through secondary markets, where shares trade at massive premiums and you needed to be an accredited investor, meaning you had to have a net worth over at least $1 million or make over $200,000 per year just to participate, or through venture funds with $1 million minimums. The average person had zero access. Now that changes with the IPO. Morgan Stanley, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, is the front runner to lead the offering, and their E-Trade platform is reportedly being set up for retail allocation of up to 30%. Which would be unprecedented. That means a regular person with a brokerage account could potentially own a piece of SpaceX for the first time ever. 21 banks are involved in this deal, and that tells you the scale of demand they're anticipating. I talk deeply about disruptive technologies like Starship in my new book, Abundance or Collapse, which helps people position themselves on the winning side of the coming disruption, especially in technology and AI. If you're interested, check out the link in the pinned comment or the description below. Thank you. Now, for the United States more broadly, this matters for reasons that go way beyond the stock market. SpaceX is deeply woven into national security. Starshield, the military version of Starlink, provides secure, encrypted communications for the Department of War. SpaceX launches classified payloads for intelligence agencies. It builds the rockets that carry America's most sensitive satellites into orbit. It's building the infrastructure that gives America dominance in space at a time when that dominance is being actively challenged, especially by China. China is aggressively building its own satellite constellations. They're developing their own reusable rockets. They have their own space station. They're planning moon bases. The space race is back, baby. And this time, it's not just about flags and prestige and hopeful messages, JFK. It's about who controls the communication infrastructure, the launch infrastructure, and eventually the orbital computing infrastructure and military infrastructure that will define the 21st century economy. A public SpaceX with $50 to $75 billion in fresh capital accelerates America's position in that race significantly. If SpaceX also gets added to the S&P 500, which at a $2 trillion valuation would make it one of the largest companies in the index, every index fund in the world would be forced to buy shares. Every 401k that tracks the S&P 500 would automatically hold SpaceX. The geopolitical and economic implications are enormous. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, SpaceX is incredibly valuable. Starship is a platform. The IPO is massive. Cool. That's the story, right? Nope. There's something potentially much bigger going on here. Chamath Palihapitiya, one of the most well-known investors in the United States. He's an early Facebook executive and a host of the All In podcast, which is one of the largest business podcasts in the world, said something on the show in January 2026 that completely reframed how most people think about this whole story. He said this.
My contrarian belief, number one, is I don't think SpaceX will IPO. I think that it will reverse merge into Tesla, and I think Elon will use it as a moment to consolidate control and power of his two seminal assets into one cap table.
Chamath is claiming that instead of SpaceX going public on its own, Tesla absorbs SpaceX or the other way around, and it becomes one company with one cap table and one entity that builds electric vehicles, humanoid robots, self-driving cars, the world's largest AI training infrastructure, a global satellite internet network, the most powerful rockets ever built, and its own advanced semiconductors. Chamath called it the Berkshire Hathaway of modern century. Do you remember that terafab thing I mentioned earlier? The $25 billion chip fabrication complex that Tesla, SpaceX, and xAI announced together in March? That's already happening. They're already building shared infrastructure. Elon Musk said that current global chip production meets only 2 to 3% of what his companies will need in the future. Now, this is Elon saying this, so keep that in mind, but they are building it themselves. 80% of the compute output is targeted at space and orbital applications. And Tesla's Optimus robots are expected to help construct and operate the facility. Think of Terafab as the physical manifestation of the convergence between Tesla and SpaceX. They're already building shared infrastructure and moving toward operating as a single system. You have Tesla's AI, SpaceX's launch infrastructure, xAI's intelligence models, which already merged into SpaceX in February, Tesla's Optimus robots building the factories, SpaceX's Starship carrying those robots and chips into orbit, orbital data centers powered by space-based solar by Tesla, Starlink providing the communication backbone. This is a gigantic convergence at play. And it's something I actually cover extremely deeply in that book I mentioned, Abundance or Collapse. And this convergence is something I actually cover extremely deeply in my new book that's coming out on May 20th called Master Plan: What Elon Musk is Really Building. If you want to pre-order that, check it out on Amazon. I'll have the link for that in the description below as well. We're writing books, y'all. Now, Dan Ives at Wedbush Securities, one of the most followed tech analysts on Wall Street and fellow Penn Stater, we are, described the potential combination as the holy grail for controlling the entire AI infrastructure across Earth and space. Polymarket, which is a prediction market, has odds of Tesla SpaceX merger ranging from around 6 to 18% depending on the timeframe this year. Now, if all of this comes true, if the IPO is really the first step toward a combined entity, then we're talking about a company that could be worth 5, 10, maybe $15 trillion within a decade or more. Not financial investment advice, again. A multiplanetary, vertically integrated industrial conglomerate that builds its own intelligence, its own robots, its own chips, energy, rockets, and its own communication infrastructure on Earth, on the moon, and eventually on Mars. There is nothing like this in human history. Now, this event, with SpaceX going public and potentially merging with Tesla, matters a huge deal because the infrastructure being built by these companies will define the next several decades of the human experience. The jobs, energy, communications, transportation, intelligence systems, whether SpaceX goes public as a standalone $2 trillion company or merges into Tesla to create something even bigger, the outcome reshapes the world either way. Gwen Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, the woman who has been running the operations of this company alongside Elon for over 2 decades, was quoted in Time magazine just last month saying, quote, "I'm not supposed to talk about the IPO in any way, but I'm looking forward to it. It's a new thing, a new set of methodologies to run companies, so I'm excited about it." We are watching the construction of something that has never existed before on this planet and beyond it. The last time a single entity had this much capability across this many domains, it was a nation state, not a company. This is what makes this moment so extraordinary. This is science fiction come to life, a truly historic moment, not just for investors that have conviction, but for civilization as a whole. Speaking of conviction and holding through these kinds of historic moments, if you've been following SpaceX or Tesla or any of Elon's companies, and you're wondering about the psychology of holding through something big like this, Bradford Ferguson and his team at Rebellionaire have a really great video called "Why Most People Could Never Hold Tesla." It gets into the mental game of staying invested when the numbers seem too crazy to be real, which is kind of the perfect topic given what we just talked about. These are the same guys who called Elon selling his shares a month before the famous Twitter poll, so they have a good understanding of how this person thinks. I'll link that video in the description in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was informative and helpful, and we'll see you in the next one. Take it easy, everybody. Mwah.